Hey guys, Pastor Jarvin from Mission Lakewood Church as we continue in our Monday, Wednesday, Friday devotions looking at the stories that take place in John's Gospel after Jesus' resurrection. Today we come to a longer passage that's often referred to as the miraculous catch of fish. So let's just jump right into our passage today. It starts in John 21, verse 1. Now remember that where we're at in the Gospels, there are these 40 days between Jesus' resurrection and when he will ascend back into heaven. So we're in that time period when we read, "Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way." Now, it is interesting that Jesus spent 40 days on this earth after his resurrection and before he ascended into heaven, because that number 40 is so significant in Scripture. We see it when Moses goes up on Mount Sinai. We see the wilderness wandering for 40 years of the Israelites. We see that Jesus went into the wilderness for 40 days at the beginning of his ministry, and now he is resurrected and walking the earth, but he's not for 40 days, but he's not actually with the disciples every minute of those 40 days, right? He had come to them, what we saw the night of Easter and then the week later, right? So he's going to come to them again. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, this is verse 2, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. So 7 disciples, which is the number of perfection. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them. And they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got into the boat. But that night they caught nothing. So Simon Peter gets a lot of grief usually when people look at this passage. And a little bit of it is deserved. You see, Simon Peter had been a fisherman before he became a follower and a disciple of Jesus. And so a lot of people will criticize him saying, hey, when Peter met the resurrected Jesus, he saw him and he just decided to go back to his regular livelihood of fishing. And so he must have abandoned his faith. Well, that's not really what's going on here. He doesn't know what to do next. And so he's going out to fish to get some food. And I think really Peter is in this funny little middle spot in his faith. You know what I'm talking about, where he hasn't abandoned his faith now. He does believe, but at the same time, he's not out really living it. He's not out there on mission. He's in that weird middle ground where he's neither hot nor cold, as Jesus will say in the book of Revelation. He hasn't abandoned faith, but he's not really living his faith out on mission. And that, I think, is going to become really significant in this passage. So at the end of verse 3, we read, "They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing." So you got to know something supernatural is already up, because seriously, a professional fisherman out with 6 of his friends, these 7 guys out there fishing all night, so like 12 hours, and at least one of them's a pro at fishing. Yeah, they're going to catch something. They catch nothing, right? So some sort of supernatural illustration lesson is about to take place. Verse 4, "Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize it was Jesus. He called out to them, 'Friends, haven't you any fish?'" Actually, this translation doesn't do a good job here. The word is not friends. The word is children. He calls out to them and says, "Children, haven't you any fish?" Which is significant because now this is their new identity. They're children of God. They're in the family of Jesus. They have now been adopted into the family of God because they believe in Jesus' death and resurrection. So this is significant that he's calling them God's children, because when we believe in Jesus, we become God's children. We become his children in the sense that we've been adopted into his family, and we are now in the family of God. So he says, "Children, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. Verse 6, he said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some." When they did, they were unable to haul any of the net because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, now remember, the disciple who Jesus loved is John. He's the guy writing this gospel, writing this account of this story. And I would love to have that sort of sense of my identity being that rooted in Jesus' love, that I would call myself the one Jesus loved. Like that's just beautiful, right? Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, this is verse 7, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garments around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. Jumped into the water. The other guys don't jump into the water. Now, this is supposed to remind us of when Jesus came to the boat, way back when Jesus came to the boat that the disciples were on in the middle of the night during the main part of his ministry, and he's walking on the water, and he calls to Simon Peter to come out and walk on the water. Simon Peter, he had some problems with his faith, but he had some really passionate moments of his faith. He was the only one that got out and walked on the water back then, and he's the only one that jumps out of the water into the water right now. Twice he gets out of the boat to go see Jesus, right? This is beautiful. He actually has to swim in all of his clothes, probably about 110 yards. So over a football field, swimming in a sea with all your clothes on. Like, he doesn't think this through in a beautiful way. Like, that's how much faith he has. Verse 8, the other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. Verse 9, when they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. So they get to the shore, and there's already a fire and some fish and some bread baking, some fish cooking. And now there's this little fire there, and don't you think Peter is right by the fire getting warm? Yeah, it's supposed to call us back, make us think of back in John 18:18, after Jesus' arrest. We read in verse 18 of John 18, Peter has just denied Jesus, denied him, that he was one of his followers. And then we read, it was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself, which is interesting that now Peter's probably back around a fire Jesus has now made, warming himself, which is going to become kind of an interesting thing, as in the next passage we look at, Jesus is going to reinstate Peter as the leader of his church and to go and feed his sheep. So kind of interesting callback there. Then in verse 10, we read, Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught. Now this is weird in two ways. The first is Jesus has already made the meal, right? I mean, it's all cooked up. The bread, the fish, it's already ready to go. And so why is he having them bring the fish? And then he says, you have just caught, right? He says, bring some of the fish you have just caught. It wasn't up to them to catch it. They caught nothing all night. He caught it. He made it happen. So why is he saying, bring the fish you have caught, if really Jesus had caught the fish? Why is he have them bring him fish if he's already cooked up the whole meal? Well, it's because the point of the passage is that Jesus wants them to participate in his mission. He wants them to have a role. Sure, he could take care of it himself. He made the catch of fish by himself when they couldn't catch it. He made the meal by himself when they weren't even there. But now he wants them to participate too. He wants them to bring some fish so they get to participate in this meal. That's the main point. So we're going to come back to that in just a minute. Verse 11, so Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153, but even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. So they figured it out by this point. Verse 13, Jesus came, took the bread and fish, and gave it to them, and did the same thing with the fish. So this is actually supposed to intentionally be reminding us of the Last Supper, when just before his arrest, Jesus sat down with his disciples and he gave them bread and wine and said, remember me. After I die, remember my death. When you take this bread that's like my body, this wine that's like the blood that was shed for me. And so we're supposed to be remembering that meal that he shared with them, where he's sharing a meal with them again. Verse 14, this was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. So obviously John's trying to get us to think, okay, resurrection, the resurrection's 3 days after Jesus' death, he rose again. And then Jesus at this point had seen his disciples 3 times after his resurrection. Okay, I'm supposed to be kind of putting these pieces together. So what in the world is the point of this kind of odd story of Jesus appearing on this shore when the disciples couldn't catch any fish, him helping them catch fish, them coming to the shore, and them eating this meal with him? Well, it's all about how Jesus wants us to participate in his mission. Here's the thing. Often in life, we get in the same situation as Peter did, right? Where we're in this middle ground in life. He had abandoned faith, actually, but now he was at a point where he wasn't denying and abandoning faith. He had figured it out enough, but he wasn't out there on mission. Jesus had said, go take my word out to everybody. He hadn't done that yet. He was just hunkered down. He was just worried about himself. He was in this middle ground of faith where he wasn't abandoning it, but he wasn't out there on his mission that he was supposed to be out on either. And so he just was kind of fishing and going about his regular life. That's like us. If you look at statistics in the United States, it's very clear that most people who identify themselves as Christians simply aren't living it. They're not out there sacrificing and on mission and sharing their faith. They just aren't. That's just the norm in our country. We, like Peter, very easily find ourselves in this middle ground of faith where we're still identifying ourselves as Christians. We're not like denying Jesus, but we're not really sacrificing. We're not really out there on mission telling others. Now, this whole catch of fish thing is obviously about that, because all the way back in Matthew 4, when Jesus first called his disciples, he said this, "Come follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." At once they left their nets and followed him. So the idea was that back way in the beginning of Jesus' ministry, when he first met the disciples, he was like, hey, this is what you're going to do. This is what this is all about. Go and fish for other people. So why do you think that one of the last stories we receive in the Gospel of John, right before Jesus leaves after his resurrection, is him having them catch fish? It's because he's trying to draw them back to that first time they met, when he said, I will send you out to fish for people. So this whole story is the callback to right in the beginning of the whole gospel story of when Jesus meets his disciples. And he's like, hey, you fishermen, you're going to go out and fish for people now. That's the point of why you're my disciples. That's the point of what we're doing here. And now we have this whole story at the end during Jesus' 40 days of being resurrected, where he has his disciples catch some fish, because the point is he wants them to participate in that mission. That's why even though he's cooked a meal, he has them bring fish. That's why even though it was him who caught the fish, he says, you have just caught. Bring me the fish you have just caught. Because he's trying to get them to see, you have to participate in this thing. Don't be like Peter and get caught in that middle ground faith where you're not abandoning or denying faith, but you're not out on mission. You're just kind of going about day-to-day regular stuff. It's the same message for us today. Most of us, most of the time, we get stuck in that middle ground faith. We're still saying we believe in Jesus. We're not denying faith. We're not denying that he really is Savior. But we're not actually fishing. We're not actually trying to create more disciples of Jesus. We're not actually sacrificing and out there sharing our faith and doing things to forward the gospel and the good news of Jesus. We're just in that middle ground. We're just kind of going about our life. So this is the whole point of this story today for us. Don't get stuck in that middle ground faith. No. Get out there. Be on mission. Even during this weird time, find a way to be on mission, sharing your faith. Get creative during a difficult time and find a way to be out there fishing for people. Be out there on mission. Don't just get back to regular life, that middle ground faith. Get out there. Be on mission. Participate in Jesus' mission. Thanks for listening today. We'll see you back here in a few days. God bless.